Hey gang, Rod at East Coast Lumberjack, and I posted a video the other day about how to file a chainsaw and gave you a lot of tidbits on how to file a saw. And there was a comment in the videos, in the comments below, that said it's actually the depth gauge, not the height of the tooth, that actually causes a chainsaw to cut at an angle. So, and I've heard that before. I've heard that the depth gauges can do it, and it makes some sense, because the amount of wood that's hitting your tooth would change. If your depth gauge is a little bit lower on one side than another, then it'll cause your that tooth to take on more wood, theoretically. But the way depth gauges work, depth gauges sit on top of the tooth. So if you're filing all your depth gauges the same, it doesn't make sense that a depth gauge could actually be set at two different levels to actually cause that to actually the chainsaw to cut in a circle. What can happen though is if your teeth are longer on one side and shorter on the other, then it actually will it'll drop the height of your depth gauges relative to the other depth gauges, but they're all still going to be 25 thousandths of an inch. So I want to test that. I want to say, okay, what is it? Is it the depth gauges, or is it the length of the tooth? So I've got my steel 660, so it's a pretty big saw, 100 cc's, and if we look at the teeth here, you can see that the teeth on this saw are it's very obvious. These teeth here, the left-handed cutters, are a lot shorter than the right-handed cutters. And you can see that the whole way up through here. The left-handed cutters right down to the line. Right-handed cutter is about maybe a millimeter or two longer. Okay, so your right-handed cutters here are longer than the left-handed cutters. So, I'm going to show you how it cuts. I already know how it cuts because I've used it. So it cuts a little crooked. I want to try to show you here how it's going to cut. So, so I want to bring you around here and show you that it does indeed cut crooked. Okay, so here's my log. Maybe back here at an angle. So you can see it's actually coming down here and going this way. Okay, it's not straight at all. The end of the log is straight. So you can see here it's cutting crooked. Okay, very obvious. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to file So, what I have is I have a depth gauge filing tool, okay, right here, and it's set for 25 thousandths of an inch. So I'm going to put this on my teeth, and they do have to be filed down a little bit, so I'm going to do the right-handed cutters first, and we're going to go around and do all these depth gauges and file them all exactly the same, and then see how it cuts. So, in all honesty, I've always wondered this question myself, because I mentioned that you should have the depth gauges and your teeth all the same length when I teach my chainsaw safety courses. And I've always, someone has told me before that they thought it was the depth gauges that caused the chainsaws to cut it crooked. And I've also heard guys say that it's the teeth that cause the depth gauges to cut crooked. So this is a great test because we know that the teeth are longer. The right-handed cutters here are longer than the left-handed cutters. So if I go through and file, I just got thinking about this morning. I thought because I was cutting, and actually one of my pet peeves I hate, a saw that cuts crooked. Drives me absolutely bananas. So I like to be able to cut nice and straight when I'm running my chainsaws. So I thought, what a great opportunity to actually file these depth gauges down and answer once and for all, is it the depth gauges or is it the length of the teeth? It was hanging up on me just a little bit. Which is it that actually causes the saw to cut in circles? So I thought, what a great opportunity to do it. All I have to do, it doesn't take too long to file down depth gauges. So if you have a little bit of patience with me here, I'm gonna just go through it. All you do, and actually I can show you how to use this depth gauge tool. This is my favorite. There's other types out there, but this is made by Oregon, 25 thousandths. And there's a hole in the middle of it. You can see right here the hole. That sits where your depth gauge pokes up through that, and the other piece back here protects the front of your tooth, your sharp cutter. So it keeps it from getting dull, because some of these flat files actually have markings on the side of them that I'll actually file to the side. This one here doesn't. This is a Husqvarna file, and it doesn't have any markings on the side of it, so it actually can't hit your tooth. But just to be safe, of course, they make them this way. So these are my right-handed cutters. I'm taking down to 25 thousandths, and they did need a fair number of strokes here. I'm taking about 8 strokes on each one of these. Depth gauges. So we're finally getting some decent weather here in New Brunswick. We're up into 15 degrees Celsius here today. So I'm trying to split out the last of my hickory logs. So this is a hickory log I was cutting, and they're tough, man. Hickory wood is tough as nails. Even the bark is tough on hickory wood. So I'm very impressed with it. I'm very impressed with it as handle wood. And this is a butt piece out of a pile I got from Quebec. And it's a little bit long. It was about, it was almost 4 feet long. And of course I make most of my bolts 3 feet long, typically. Now this one here is going to be a little bit shorter because there's such butt flare on this piece of wood. This piece of hickory is splitting out very nicely though. So I'm getting lots of handle wood out of these logs, which is a good thing because the price of hickory for some reason went through the roof. I paid double what I did last year at this mill yard in Quebec. But again, beggars can't be choosers because I can't get down to Connecticut or Pennsylvania right now because of all the silly COVID rules. Hey, all my American friends that are watching this, would you get a hold of Biden and tell him to wake up and get rid of these silly restrictions so that we can actually travel back and forth again? I'd like to get down and get a little bit more hickory wood from the U.S. So, but until they change these crazy restrictions at the border, can't go too far. So I'm taking down, you always file your depth gauges as well from the inside of the tooth to the outside of the tooth. If you don't, you'll know it right off the bat because it makes a real loud squeak. We're almost done this side here right now. This is the right-handed cutters. Then we'll flop it around and do the left-handed cutters and answer that question once and for all. Is it depth gauges that cause a chainsaw to cut in a circle, or is it length of teeth? Because once I'm done filing here, That's that side done. Once I'm done filing, the teeth are going to be a different length, but all the depth gauges are going to be exactly the same. So if it still cuts in a circle, we'll know that it's tooth length, not depth gauge length. So these are all being filed to 25 thousandths of an inch with my tool. Not sure if you watched the steel series yesterday on, I guess it was Saturday. Steel USA had their Champions Trophy, and I enjoyed watching it. I know most of the competitors in the USA from all my years competing. One of my favorites, of course, is Matt Koger, who's Paul Koger's little boy. Used to be his little boy. Paul's a few years older than I am, from West Virginia, and his son Matt is national champion right now. And Paul and I both competed for a lot of years and loved to compete. We were never, I would say, we were never national champion caliber. Close, you know, like we weren't bad at all in our own rights. Did very well in our local area. So Paul Koger was a great competitor in West Virginia. Same thing with me here. But our boys have done it phenomenal. So we're living vicariously through our kids. So Paul's boy, Matt, is the national champ in the United States. And of course, my boys, Ben and Nathan, are world champion steel timber sports competitors at the rookie level. And of course, right now, Nathan and Ben are number 1 and 2 in Canada. So it's quite fun actually to talk to those guys and watch them compete. And we've got a qualifier coming right up in Canada. The Eastern qualifier here is going to be in Meductic, so the old fart made it into the top 20 in the country. So I got to get by a qualifier. There's lots of young guys, so I'm doing a fair bit of training around the house here right now, trying to get ready for get myself in shape so I can try to make the top. I think they're taking the top 12 this year in July out at the Nationals. So anyhow, I was watching the U.S. finals yesterday, and when we watched the Australian finals, Braden Meyer when they're doing the Champions Trophy, they do a series of 4 events in a row. And when they're done with the stock saw, which is the first event, they have to take off their safety glasses and their muffs. And it says in the rules that you have to dispose of them properly. That's what it says in the steel rules. So when you dispose of them properly, they're not supposed to interfere with the other competitor. So in Australia here, just a few weeks ago, Braden Myers was against Brad DeLosa. I know both those guys in the finals. And Braden Myers, in his panic, took his earmuffs off, and they actually flew across the stage, and they went right in front of Brad DeLosa as he jumped onto his underhand block. Now, Brad didn't see the muffs. It didn't bother him at all. He didn't miss a beat. They finished just a stroke apart, with Braden finishing first. But still, Australia actually DQ'd Braden because, according to the rules, he didn't dispose of his safety gear properly. And they did. You could see very clearly in the replay. Just go on YouTube and watch it, and you can see the muffs go clearly right by Brad's feet. But Brad didn't see them. So the good thing was it didn't actually cause Brad any trouble. But nonetheless, because the rule was there, of course, they disqualified Braden. Now, fast forward to this weekend at the steel finals. Matt Koger he's in the semifinals against Nathan Hodges, and when he takes off his glasses, they actually, when he throws them down, they actually scoot to the middle of the stage. Now, they didn't stay on his side, and again, they're just barely over whatever imaginary line is there. But I thought, there's no way they're gonna, it wasn't in Nate's way whatsoever. But lo and behold, at the end of that race, they went back to the cameras and reviewed it, and they disqualified Matt. I couldn't believe it. Well, Matt Matt's a great competitor. He's a great sportsman, which I like about him. But he's also a phenomenal competitor right now. And of course, he didn't make the finals, which was the next round. He would have been against his rival, Jason Lentz. So instead, he was in the short final with another competitor. And Matt was on fire. And if you've never watched the Champions Trophy, it's a good one to watch because Matt sets a world record, letting some steam off because it was a pretty foolish call. I think it was a very foolish call. Poor Rick Hallett had to make the call on that one. And again, I think they should be given a little bit more latitude because if it doesn't give you a competitive advantage, there's no reason to disqualify him there for that. So anyways, I just thought I'd share that with you while I'm finishing off this side of the left-handed cutters and their depth gauges, and that's the last one there. So now, the moment of truth. We're going to go back down through. Actually, I'll go put my safety pants on just so everybody feels good about it. Okay, so we're going to make one more cut, and we'll see how straight it is. Okay, so the real test. So as you know, you've just watched me file the depth gauges down again with a depth gauge tool so that the left hand and right hand cutters, the depth gauges are both 25 thousandths of an inch on both sides. So we cut once knowing that the teeth were longer on one side than the other. Then we filed all the depth gauges the same height. So now let's look. Here's our log. And you can see it's actually traveling a little bit more. So despite the fact that I have all the depth gauges the same height, this second cut is looking even worse than the first cut. Okay? So, the proof's always in the pudding. So, and actually I didn't know. I mean, to be honest, I had no idea which one had more effect on the other, the length of the tooth or the height of the depth gauge. And of course, the length of the tooth affects the height of the depth gauge because as your tooth is sloped, as I mentioned last time, and of course every time when you drop down your depth gauge, the height of the tooth determines how high the depth gauge is relative to the tooth. So right now, even though one side of these teeth is longer than the other, and we'll look again here, and you can see very clearly that the right-handed cutters are longer than the left-handed cutters. They're about a mil longer. You can see here from this one to this one. This one's longer again, this one's shorter, this one's longer, this one's shorter. So it's very obvious on that chain that the right-handed cutters are a millimeter or two longer than the left-handed cutters, and it still cuts in a circle when I have the depth gauges the same height but the cutter teeth are longer on one side than the other. So we've answered that question. That's no way like the present, and to do it and actually just make the changes and actually try it and see what happens. So we've done that now, and we've answered conclusively that it actually is tooth length, not length of the depth gauges, that cause a saw to cut not straight, crooked. So again, keep all your teeth the same length, because that'll keep your saw cutting straight in the wood. Okay, and actually keep all your depth gauges the same height as well. And if your teeth are the same height, your depth gauges are going to be the same as well. East Coast Lumberjack answering another question for you here on YouTube. Take care.